Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm here, I have the pleasure of being with Aaron with First On Site. We're going to give it just about a minute or two to let our participants log in for both board members and managers alike. So if you give us a minute, feel to get you logged in, we'll get started. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A down at the bottom or at the top, depending how your Zoom is set up. We'll do our best to get to all the questions. We can't guarantee we'll get to all of them, but we will do our best to get to them. Thank you again for being here with us today.
How are you guys doing on the hurricane prep? I feel like all of your managers I've spoken to are like on the ball.
Yeah, it's, this year they're predicting that it's not going to be as bad, but still all it takes is one. So, we're trying to do our best to be prepared early on.
Absolutely. There's so much you can do now to get ahead of it that when it's around, you got a plan and it's in place and you're good.
Correct, 100%. If you don't, the bomb blows up in your face.
Absolutely.
I say how it is sometimes, so.
I like you. That's awesome. Oh, we got a couple fun people in here. Hi, Steven. I haven't seen you in a while. Steven Smith. Awesome. And again,
for those of you logging in, we're just giving our participants some time to log in. We'll get started at 11:02. I have the pleasure of being with Aaron with First On Site. We're looking forward to putting together this webinar today. For those managers, this course is a CU course that First On Site will provide you with. So any questions or concerns, please feel free to use the Q&A in the bottom, and Aaron or myself will do our best to answer those questions throughout the webinar.
Absolutely. And I'll get those certificate of completions to everybody at the end of the business day today or first thing tomorrow morning.
You're always on point with that.
The DBPR kind of gives me a little bit of an issue sometimes, so I always make sure I do it the day of and follow up, and you never know with them.
Yeah. Sometimes that online platform, right? They have a couple of the things. Yeah.
It's a little crazy.
It happened to me it hadn't happened in a while because we do that transition. I forget, we have 2 or 3 courses, and I didn't, I started to receive emails like, this doesn't look right. And all of a sudden we looked, there was an error in the upload. But it is what it is.
It was funny during COVID, the entire website went down for a month and a half. And we were like manually uploading them for a month and a half. It took me like 2 hours a day to do.
Wow.
Wild.
Yeah, the manual it's work. It's work. The spreadsheet's the way to go.
For sure. Absolutely.
All right, excellent. So again, thank you all for being here today. My name is Rafael Aquino. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Affinity Management. I have the pleasure of being here with Aaron with First On Site. We will be going over hurricane preparedness. So Aaron, I'll let you take it from here. I know you have your presentation and so forth. Feel free to introduce yourself and give our listeners an idea of your firm and what the firm represents.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate that, Rafael. My name is Erin Nickerson with First On Site. We are the 2nd largest commercial restoration company in North America. How I like to describe ourselves is if it's on the inside of your building and it doesn't belong there, whether it be fire, water, mold, COVID cleaning, biohazards, we remove that off your property and get you back to a pre-loss condition. Today, we're going to be doing Are You Hurricane Ready? And we really wanted to get a deep dive in on this conversation from the property management perspective as well. So again, this is a CEU that I will be teaching, but I really wanted to have Rafael's opinion on what can your property manager do better this season that they've never done before? And what role does your property management company play in not only your hurricane preparedness, but your property's recovery after the storm? So I guess we'll get started now. I'm going to share my screen and we are recording. Oh, Rafael, would you mind giving me permission?
Yep, there you go.
Beautiful. And we are recording this, so we will make sure that if you need it, we can send it out to you after this class. And you can see my screen, Rafael?
Yes, I can.
Beautiful. So here we go. Again, this class is called Are You Hurricane Ready? It is registered with the DBPR state of Florida as well as BOMI International. So if you hold any commercial property management license, this is a continuing education class for you as well. We're going to talk about first why we're here. The most important thing we understand about the storm is the terms of why the storm is categorized the way it is, because that is how our property is affected by the storm. The communication plan, we're talking about pre-storm documentation, exterior preparedness, and interior preparedness, as well as returning to your association and your property after the storm and your post-hurricane response checklist. So you guys are all here because you're involved in managing and maintaining one or more properties. You're also the people as board members that get blamed when everything goes wrong and get absolutely no credit when things are happening smoothly. Same for my property managers on this call. So what Raphael and I really want to drill home today is a couple key points: how to respond to a major storm effectively as a team, how to prevent further property damage post-storm, limit your financial loss, prevent loss of life, most importantly, and protect your properties and your homeowners, because reality strikes. An emergency can happen at any time, and we could get a heavy rain on a Tuesday, and you can use these same processes and procedures to prepare for those, just like you prepare for a hurricane. So Florida hasn't been impacted by a hurricane, like a massive storm, in over a decade. So it's important that we get out of this sense of comfort in our comfort zones and really have a hard conversation with not only our board members and our property managers, but our residents themselves. I guarantee you at least 50% of your residents that are in your buildings and on your property currently are either new to Florida, have never been through a storm before, and don't really understand the actual potential effects of what power without power for 2 weeks could be. So we want to make sure that we get out of that complacent attitude and really get down to the nitty gritty. What can we do today to prevent the damage from happening tomorrow? So the first thing we need to do is really educate ourselves. What are the residents responsible for versus what the association is responsible for? And how do those two things, when they're done correctly, work together to be successful? Because June 1 is here. We've already passed it. So we need to make sure that everybody's on the same page. So what we need to learn first is the different categories of the storm, because that affects the wind levels. So let's talk about that.
When it comes to hurricanes, each one's impacts are a little bit different, but the wind speeds that we talk about along the Saffir-Simpson scale, those are very specific, and the damage caused in those categories, kind of predictable. So let me show you. Let's start off with a Category 1 storm. And the damage here, not too bad. A couple of shingles fall off, you can have some palm fronds bending in the wind, but everything basically remains intact. Category 2, that's where you really start to feel it. Look at the windows of the house. They can be hit from debris from the outside and already start breaking in a Category 2. Your trees are significantly bent over in the wind, and the siding of the house itself can break, flapping there in the wind, adding to those eerie noises inside. Category 3. I've heard only a Category 3, but it's not only anything except really bad news. In a Category 3, you can have the door of the house blown in because the winds get so strong. You can have the roof of the house start to flap up and down in the wind because it can lift off those weak points, and a lot of those trees start to fall. Category 4, the damage is even worse. You get most trees falling, most of your windows breaking, most of your shingles fly away, and then Cat 5 is as high as the category scale goes. By Cat 5, no shingles remain anywhere nearby. The holes in the roof get so big that the walls of the house start to fall because they're not attached to anything anymore. There won't be any trees up in the neighborhood. That's just catastrophic damage. But again, that's just from the wind. And there are other impacts from hurricanes, and they all vary through the season. So stick with the Weather Channel to keep you safe. Tropics head towards your neck of the woods.
So when we talk about the wind, and I always hear this, and I'm sure you can relate, Raphael, like a Category 2 storm, we're talking over 100-mile-an-hour winds that can cause significant damage to your property. But it's not always the wind that I really care about, because what's really the highest threat to life when it comes to a storm is actually storm surge. So what is storm surge, and how does it affect us and our properties?
The greatest threat to loss of life during a hurricane doesn't come from the wind, it comes from the water that the wind pushes ashore. This is something that we call storm surge. Here, think of it this way. You're standing on the beach on a bright summer, sunny afternoon, and you watch the tides go out, and you watch the tides come in. Everyone knows the tides are caused by the gravitational pull of the sun and the moon, but add to the mix a powerful storm, a hurricane, When a hurricane moves on shore, its strong winds push water toward the coast, piling up water near shore, and the water has nowhere to go but up and inland. And it's that water on top of the normal tide that we call the storm surge. And storm surge can reach as high as 20 feet and extend miles inland, causing devastating flooding and life-threatening storm surge up and down the coast. Now that's your hurricane IQ.
So when we talk storm surge, the biggest example and the most emphasis I like to put on is Hurricane Katrina. Almost 2,000 people lost their lives due to storm surge. This was one of the most costly hurricanes in the history of the United States, and it caused over $110 billion in damages. And remember, Katrina was only a Category 3, so it's never just only a Category 3. Those storm surges were almost 30 feet tall. So how do we prepare for those things to happen to us? What can we do today that will better prepare us better than ever now? We got to think about those things. So let's dive right in. The first thing we need to talk about is your communication plan. Who should be involved in your communication plan? Raphael, what do you suggest your board members and all of the people on a property that should be involved?
Sure, that's a good question, Erin. It really depends on the size of the property, but in general, there's a lot of individuals that need to be involved in the process for it to be for the plan to be executed correctly. So you have some associations where they have 30 plus employees. In those instances, the team members really stop doing what their day-to-day operational tasks are, and their focus would be on executing the hurricane plan that your community should have. That plan should be already, I should say now, in this time of year, should be already being tested and doing a trial run to make sure that everyone understands what their responsibilities are. For those communities that are a little bit smaller, that maybe only have 2 to 3 team members, part of your plan is going to need to outline who's going to be responsible for what and when. In most instances, especially properties that maybe don't even have on-site team members, board members or volunteers are going to be needed. A lot of associations, especially more smaller to medium size, believe that the management company needs to handle it all. But you have to keep in mind, depending how your association is structured, if you're on a portfolio account, that manager is managing multiple properties. So they won't be able to be at your property. Maybe they'll have to divide their time evenly amongst all the properties. So you need to assess it as a board, understand the kind of personnel that you have. And lastly is the partners that you have as well. So part of what we do relies heavily on the partnerships that we have, such as First Onsite and other organizations where they may be able to assist in part of the preparation as well.
Absolutely. It's a great point. And what I think how you're successful in identifying who the key players are on your property is having a pre-storm season meeting and going through how are we buttoning up our property? Who's going to be responsible, let's say, for putting up the hurricane shutters and taking those shutters down. So that pre-storm season meeting is key. We need to make sure that we have a communication plan for residents as well as the tenants. You can't rely on your unit owners to tell their renters that this is the building's plan and this is what they're responsible for. You need to make sure that you have tenant information as well as that as the residents who own the physical property. We need to have a communication plan for them that starts June 1. We've already should have sent out our hurricane package for the season saying, this is what's coming down the pipeline. This is the supplies you need. This is the closest shelter to the building. This is where you can bring animals if you have them. That communication should have already gone out. If it has not yet and you need help coming up with that communication package, let me know. I'd be more than happy to help you come up with your specific property's needs. In that communication plan, we need to make sure we have a supply list. And it's not only a supply list for your residents, but it's also a supply list for your community association. What does that supply list look like for you? Maybe you need board up materials because you don't have hurricane shutters. Maybe you have a water crash cart that doubles as your hurricane crash cart, and some things that you could need on that we can go over as we get deeper into the presentation. You also are going to need an approved vendors list. This is super important for your post-storm recovery, that you can get this done now today. Who physically should be on your property and who should not be on your property? We need to make sure that not only your residents know who those are, but your internal teams and your security. The last thing we want is some guy with a chainsaw coming up on your property and after the storm has passed and says, hey, I'll give me $50 and I'll cut down all your trees. And maybe he slips and falls and then sues the association for his medical bills. So making sure we have the proper contracts in place, and we're gonna get into those a little bit deeper in a few more slides. Your post-storm communication plan is also key. What happens if your property manager can't get back to your property as a first responder? What's the backup plan? Is it your head of maintenance? Is it the board president? Is it your head of security? We need to make sure that when that first responder comes back to the property, that they have a checklist for assessing the property's damages. So that's really, really important for you to have at your property. And it's important that it lives in a digital place, like a cloud, and in a physical checklist for them to go around the property. And we'll go over that checklist in a few more slides again. We also need to emphasize the importance of pre-storm contracts. So what is a pre-storm contract? A pre-storm contract is an agreement that you have with a vendor, let's say your landscaping company, for post-storm response to get your property back up and running. We need to make sure you have a couple key vendors as a part of this list. Your first one is going to be your landscaper. You need to have a commitment from them in writing that they are going to come to your property post-storm and clear up debris. If you suffer damages during a storm and you need a contractor like myself or a roofer or somebody to mitigate the damage you have, if I physically can't get onto your property because there's landscaping in the way and down trees, you're not going to get service in a timely fashion. So that's your number one provider. Who are your other people that you need contracts with in a post-storm situation? Emergency services, that would be me first on site, or another restoration contractor. If you get a flood, a fire, and these things happen during a storm, wind-driven rain events we see on a very common and consistent basis. And it doesn't even have to be a storm. It could be a Tuesday afternoon, but you need that contract, because if you do not have these contracts for these people in place and you go to call them post-storm, you're on the bottom of their list if you can even make their list. So you need a commitment from everybody in writing that they are going to have your back post-storm. So besides your emergency services, you're going to need a plumber. And with plumbers, they don't always have a contract, so to speak, but that means that as a property manager and as a board, you need to have a backup plan. So let's say you give John Smith, who's a local guy, has got 2 trucks, all your business year round. You need to have a backup plan of a larger company that's going to be able to support you in a post-storm situation. We need to talk about electrical. Our mechanicals on our property. So maybe you have a cooling tower. If that cooling tower malfunctions, how quickly are they going to get out to you back up and running? Some other mechanicals, your elevators, very, very important that you have a maintenance contract with them. Your roofs. This is a mandatory item if you're in a condo building. You need to make sure that you have a maintenance program with a roofing company. If you do not have a roofing contract for maintenance, they are not coming to you post-storm. Any of the big companies that do great work, they have other people that they're going to service. So you need to make sure you think about the risks for your property specifically and how you're managing that risk. Some other things you might need: fire suppression, security. And the reason why we want to know security's plan is if you're outsourcing your security to a private company, they're going to have their own set of rules for their employees getting back to work. We need to make sure that you're aware of what that is. And if you need to set an expectation for getting them back sooner or getting them back later, that you do that now and you do that today. The other thing we want to talk about when we talk about security is if you suffer massive losses during a storm and you can't get service in the first 24 hours, we always want to talk about having the option or the conversation at the very least to talk to your security company and say, hey, if I need a rover to be here 24 hours instead of just the normal 8-hour workday, is that an option for us? So thinking about these out-of-the-box ideas and how we can minimize risk and exposure is what we want to talk about. Raphael, is there anything you want to add to this?
No, I think you brought up really the main partners. What I do want to add is understanding, I guess, especially with the elevators, because we've seen it in the past, of understanding what the protocols are. I mean, most we know, but either way, you still want to have a conversation with the elevator company. So we've had instances where maybe, prior management or prior self-managed properties didn't know that they needed to leave their elevator up on the 4th or 5th floor. They didn't know that they needed to shut down the elevator completely, so that if there are any storm surges or any power surges throughout the hurricane, that doesn't damage any equipment. Further communicating that to your residents earlier on, if those are the protocols that you're going to follow, which you should, of what the steps your association is going to take, so that no one, is surprised. Depending where your building's located, you may have a mandatory evacuation, so that may even be able to help you with the mandatory evacuation once residents know that the elevator is not going to be available for X amount of time.
I think you brought a really great point up too, making sure we communicate that to the residents. June 1, start now. Say the elevator is going to be down if we're in a mandatory evacuation. Communicate that again as the storm approaches. Maybe it's 7 days out, 5 days out, whatever is appropriate for your property. But that constant communication and expectation setting is going to make your job after a lot easier.
Correct.
Who are some other vendors and strategic partners you might need? Local lumber yards, if you need board up supplies, board up equipment, you might need that. Or you need to have a restoration partner like myself that would be able to do that board up for you post-storm, which means that that's the conversation that you need to have prior to going into hurricane season. What are some other things that you might need? If you have a generator on your property, how are you getting fuel? And more importantly, what does your generator power on your property? We know it powers emergency lighting. Does it power your manager's office? So if your manager returns to your property after a storm, you have no power, and they have no power in their management office, how are they going to be able to communicate with the residents? We need a plan for that too. So knowing what your generator supplies, how long it lasts for, and making sure that we test that generator on a weekly, bi-weekly, whatever your property needs to make sure that that generator is in good working order. We need to start talking about that today. There's also some fuel supply companies that you can get into a small contract with that you can say, okay, for X amount of fee, maybe it's $500 for the year, we are going to give you post-storm fuel drop off at day 7. Maybe that's how long your generator lasts, but you need to have a plan for that too, because as we saw after Irma, and Irma was a category 1, don't forget, there was no fuel here. There was none. The only people that were getting fuel were from the fuel supply companies coming from out of state into the state. So it's important to have that contract if that's a risk for your property, especially if you're on a barrier island. The other thing I want to remind you guys of is if you're working with a restoration contractor year round, if you're working with a elevator company year round, make sure that you have your account manager's cell phone number stored in your phone. And the reason I bring this up is if you can get a hold of me, I can make everything happen quicker than you calling my 800 number, sitting on the phone, waiting in line, potentially battling out with individual unit owners as well on that 800 number. We work for you 365 days out of the year. This is the time where we have your back and we show you that we can support you in a better way than just picking up a phone and calling somebody random. So keep that in mind that with all of the suppliers and with all of the vendors that you use at your specific property, use your account managers in these situations. Make sure you have a full understanding of what your account manager can do for you. The last couple of strategic partners that I want to talk about after we spoke about generators, temporary cooling, and temporary office space. So your generator goes down, you have no more fuel. Maybe you suffer a loss in your building. How are we going to dry your building out if you don't have power? You need to make sure you align yourself with contractors that are right to service your property. Does your restoration company have generators? I do. Does your restoration company have temporary cooling? What happens if your cooling tower goes down? You suffer some sort of water intrusion issue. Now we're talking over 3 days, a mold issue. Yeah. So you need to have a preventative maintenance plan for that situation. So temporary cooling, you have to have a restoration contractor that has that equipment, or you have to be able to go to an equipment supplier. So you need to either work with a company that has that, or you need to have a contract in place to have that dropped off in a post-storm situation. And then the other thing we need to talk about is the temporary office space. So if your generator does not power your manager's office, where's your manager working from to communicate with the residents? What's the plan for that? So I know, Raphael, what would you do with the temporary office space if?
Yeah, so believe it or not, we do twofold. Number one, we have the abilities and the capabilities of giving our managers full access to their systems from their phone. But we also take an extra step of even printing most of the materials just in case we have any issues, right? Things happen, we're all humans, so are our managers. So let's say they forgot the car charger or whatever it may be, they still have a portfolio where they can go and grab the information that's necessary to be able to contact who they need to contact. So it's important that you understand what systems you currently have in your association, what capabilities you have so that you can prepare a backup plan should something fail.
And I like that you brought up the backup plan. So how I always like to think about what's my backup plan. If there is a single point of failure and maybe you're at an older self-managed association, all you have is paper documentation. There's things that we can do to have a backup plan for that paper document.
Correct.
And I think that what's my backup plan to my backup plan? There can't be a single point of failure, and we never want our manager to be that single point of failure, or our board member to be our single point of failure, or that piece of paper that was hanging on the wall with a piece of tape on it as our single point of failure. So what's your backup plan for that? And we're going to dive deep into that and when we talk about interior and exterior preparedness. But I wanted to go back to communication. So why are there so many parties that are involved in your communication plan? The more people that know the plan and know what role they take in that plan, the more successful you are going to be. And effective communication ensures the safety of not only your residents, but as of your staff as well. Because again, we're all people. So we need to be able to get home to our families and secure our homes. So that's why this plan is so critical. So what should your plan include? The first thing is you need to gather all pertinent documentation. So we're talking insurance policies, we're talking employee records, that's first name, last name, phone numbers, address of where people live. Then we need to make sure we have all resident and tenant unit owner information. And that's key in your communication of getting the property back opened up. Exterior preparedness plan, your interior preparedness plan needs to be as a part of that. And your recovery team and your recovery team's assignments need to be a part of that. So I guess my question for you, Raphael, on this one would be, if they don't have all of this information, what would be your best word of advice? Where would they start?
Yeah, so I mean, the place to start is really trying to get this information now, as you've stated. But if you just have, let's say, just basic telephone numbers, there's different service providers where you could do what we call robocalls, which we're all used to nowadays. Where, that'll call the individual, let them know you could have a pre-recorded 15-second message, 30-second message, whatever it may be. If they don't pick up the call, it will leave them a voicemail letting them know that XYZ Association is initiating their hurricane plan. Elevators will be locked down or gates will be left open, whatever it may be. But I wouldn't wait till then. I mean, hopefully for those managers and board members that are on this call, they're on this call because they want to get themselves prepared. And the idea would be is to make sure that you're capturing those telephone numbers, email addresses, and that way you're able to communicate to the residents of what the plan is and how you're moving forward with it.
Absolutely. And I think that it's really important to have like the phone system as an example of a communication plan, whether that be Facebook groups or the phone system or an email that comes from corporate. There has to be some sort of communication for the pre-storm and the post-storm when our managers and our board is going back to the property. The last thing I want you guys to be dealing with when returning to your property is 45 phone calls, 145 phone calls, 500 phone calls, depending on how big your property is. Your manager can't recover your property if the entire management team is just picking up the phone and answering, have you been in my unit? Is it wet? Do I have any damages? We can't have 150 phone calls from the property owners that are remote. We're never going to be able to get our job done assessing the property post-storm or being able to recover should we have a loss post-storm.
Correct. And that's an excellent point, Aaron. And it's important that you communicate to the residents that particular challenge. So if there is a major storm coming, then the idea would be is to let the residents know we're aware of the storm. This is the communication format, and set some kind of expectation so that you don't have a ton of frustrated residents, especially for those snowbirds that they have no idea what's going on here in the middle of the summer because they're up in Canada or Northeast, wherever they're from. So you want to already set that expectation. Listen, you could leave a message. We're going to get back to you in X amount of days, or we're going to be communicating via these channels, giving you updates of what's going on.
Absolutely. So what type of documents do you need to review before the storm season? And this is something that you should be doing today if you have not already done so. The first thing is you need to review your property insurance policy with your agent and your board. It's important that you know what you are covered for and what you're not covered for. I had one property after Hurricane Irma, and that was, again, only a Category 1 storm that was uninsured for a portion of their building and a portion of where their pool sits. And it was a cement wall that had a beautiful decorative motif on it, hundreds of thousands of dollars into this one particular wall, decorative. They were not insured for this, and the wall cost them almost $1 million to replace. Wow. So it's important that you know what is and what is not. It also is important that you understand your deductible when it comes to a storm. Our deductible no longer goes to a per loss occurrence event. So most of your associations are going to be between maybe $1,500 and $5,000, depending on what type of insurance policy you have for your property. So when we get the storm that hits, It then turns to a percentage of your total asset. So most of you are going to be between 3 and 5% of your total asset. So if we have $1 million asset, that we're talking some serious money in a deductible before we even get the insurance company to step in to support us with the loss that we suffer during the storm. So now think about that as an association for you right now. How much money do you have in your reserves today to be able to cover that potentially $300,000? I have some properties that their deductible is $2.5 million when a hurricane comes. How much money is in your reserves, or do you have a line item right now that covers that insurance deductible should we get hit in 30 days? Something to think about.
Yeah, 100%.
A lot of
And if you need to know that number already, because as you stated, when you mentioned about the line of credit, you know, if you don't have the monies available, you need to make sure that you have some form of being able to cover it. Because in most instances, like in Irma, it happened with several associations where it was very challenging to even meet the deductible. Fortunately enough, you know, the insurance company was saying what they wanted to say. Fortunately enough for our client, we recommended having a public adjuster, which showed, hey, to bring the building whole, this is what the total cost is going to be. But there's still a major out of pocket that the association is going to have to absorb.
Absolutely. And there's several different ways that you can get to that deductible number and prepare for that deductible number. The first is properly reserving. And I know a lot of associations don't want to do that. So the caveat to that is the line of credit. Right now, if you do not have a line of credit, please talk to your banker and who you bank with. Our interest rates are so incredibly low that it's a very minimal cost to have that line of credit per year. So it's a great preparation. It's a great tool to have in your arsenal as a property. And remember, you're a business. So these things have to be done in order to run your business successfully and to run your businesses so you do not have your residents and your unit owners taking a hit for a special assessment of 4 or 5, potentially tens of millions of dollars in a post-storm situation. So what else do we need to know as our pre-storm preparation? We need to know if our property is prone to flooding. Are you in a flood zone? What's the elevation level of your property? If you're on the beach, are you 10 feet above sea level? Are you 5 feet above sea level? Because that makes a huge difference once we start getting that storm surge. It also makes a huge difference in your preparation of the exterior of your building. Do we need sandbags? Do we need a lot of sandbags? Do we need a little bit of sandbags? Also, what other tools can we use if those sandbags fail? And we'll get to that in a few more slides again. We also need to make sure that we inform key employees and staff of their specific responsibilities and that we let them take ownership over those tasks. We don't need to be standing over them, hovering and saying, did you do this? Did you do that? Let them take ownership and make sure you communicate with them once an hour, once every 3 hours. Hey, how's it going? Did you get X, Y, and Z done? Great, let's check it off the list. It's that type of communication that we want to see with your teams that will encourage everybody to do their part, because it is a team effort to button up a property. The other thing we need to do today, if we don't have this already, is a content inventory. A content inventory is all of the physical asset that we own as an association. So maybe for a condo building, in your interior hallways, you have beautiful artwork. Maybe you have fish tanks in your lobby. Maybe you have pool furniture. Maybe you have a gym. Do you have a list of all of the gym equipment that you have right now as an association? I know that's worth tens of thousands of dollars in most of your buildings and most of your properties. So it's important that we don't need to go rewrite the wheel. All you need to do today is have your maintenance guy or have your board members go around with a camera, video all your assets that the association physically owns. And taking that a step farther, I also want you to photograph your high ticket dollar items that you service on a consistent basis as an association. So what are those? Those are going to be your generators. I want a photo of those. I want a photo of your sump pumps that you should be having serviced on a consistent basis and in good working order. I want to see your elevator rooms, photo document that. And I want a picture of what's on your roof, whether that be AC units, whether that be a cooling tower, any high ticket maintenance dollar item that you do on a consistent basis. I want a photo of those things. We want to make sure that we do that twice a year, because then that provides us a benchmark as an association. Once at the beginning of hurricane season, once at the end of hurricane season. And I also want those to coincide with your preventative maintenance records. So like your elevator, you have service on a very, very consistent basis in your elevator room. There's a book that they write down when they serviced, what they did. I want to see that across all your high ticket dollar items. With those two things working in conjunction with each other, so your content inventory and your preventative maintenance records, When you do suffer a loss from, let's say, a storm in 2 months, and your cooling tower goes down from a hurricane, now we have an accurate service record that says we've done our due diligence as a property management team and making sure that this asset was well maintained. And now we suffered damage due to the storm. Here's our proof. So it helps the insurance process and helps you get paid faster as well. Because now your insurance carrier doesn't have to do a deep dive and say, was this maintained? Was this actually due to the storm, or was there neglect involved in the situation? We want to make sure that we have all this evidence up front. And you guys should be doing all these things all the time anyway. And your management teams and your management companies should be helping you do that. The last thing that drives me crazy, so I added it to the slide, is making sure your mechanical rooms are clear of debris. If you're using your mechanical rooms as storage, that is a code violation, that is a hazard. And I see crazy violations from every single county that will come in and charge you $5,000, $10,000 for having these rooms filled with just stuff and debris. Maybe it's your residents, I don't know, couches or something. I've seen crazy stuff, but it's important that any mechanical room that you have should be used for mechanicals, not for storage. Raphael, anything you want to add to that?
I think you're good there. I mean, at the mechanical rooms, a big point. I smile because when we bring on new properties and you see those rooms, I go, you know, if you want to see someone's work, just go into someone's office or the mechanical room, and it'll be a quick reflection of how organized or lack of organization they have. So it is very important, because how can you get to a main cutoff, power shutoff if you have a couch covering the main panel? So yeah, very important. One thing I did want to mention, and just popped up now that you brought up with regards to the records, the insurance companies are getting smarter, especially since they've had such major losses in the state of Florida over the past couple of years. It's important that you do keep very strong records of all the assets, as Aaron mentioned, and you have those readily available. Hopefully, if you're using some kind of online system, there's not much to do because it's all there already. But it's important that you're keeping that there available, so that when a claim does come, the first angle they're going to take is, was this piece of equipment maintained? If it wasn't, they may just exclude it from a potential claim. So it is very important that you keep that in order.
I want to stress this one step farther too with Raphael. Your roof is included in that. You need to have a preventative maintenance plan for your roofs. I know that a lot of our properties are aging and quite rapidly. We're on the beach. There's the intercoastal, the salt water just tears our properties apart. Your roof is the biggest one that they're going to come down on. Our legislation changed this past year regarding roofs and insurance claims. If you're not familiar with that, we can talk about that off the call, but there's a lot of things coming down the ladder when it comes to insurance claims that is going to be changing, especially at the association level. So any due diligence you can do now and making sure you have those maintenance records, it's so important. I can't stress that enough. This is a great tool. It's propertyhawk.com. This is a backup plan to your backup plan. If you do not have a cloud-based software and you're not with a management company, Propertyhawk is an iCloud-based website. They give you really good tools and you can store information up there. It's like kind of like having a Google Drive, just another backup plan for you. So some tools for preparedness and recovery as well, actually. Documentation is going to be critical in your recovery stage. So it's important that you have a plan for that. So first and foremost, we need to have a backup plan if our manager's office gets wet. What if your computer goes down? We need a backup system to secure storage. So for management companies, you guys usually have an iCloud-based software. I'm sure that Raphael can talk to you guys a little bit more about that. We also need to make sure that we have a backup plan for employee information. Everything cannot live on your manager's phone. You need to have a hard copy as well as a phone copy. What if your manager can't make it back to the building because their house is underwater or their street is blocked off? You need to make sure that there's a physical copy that lives at the property level. We need to make sure that we have a communication plan to speak with our employees coming back to the property as well. That communication plan is once the governor says, okay, everybody can go back onto the barrier island if that's where you're located, we're putting the bridges back down. What's the timing that your employees are going to be required to return to the property? Is it 1 hour? Is it 2 hours? Is it a phone chain system that the property manager has a buddy that they call and then that person calls another person? That needs to be done today.
Right. And if I can add to that, Aaron, because there's certain cities that have certain requirements. Miami Beach specifically does require the manager to be listed with them already. So if you're a manager and you haven't been listed, we highly recommend that you put yourself on that list and you tag it to your particular association. Because if you're not a resident of the association, a resident of the island, I'm sorry, they won't allow you to go in. So you have to check your respective city, depending where you're located, to see if they have any of those kinds of requirements.
Absolutely. And I'm going to piggyback on what he just said. It also goes for your vendors as well. I have a federal badge as a vendor that allows me onto barrier islands in a post-storm situation. I also have properties up in Jupiter that I need to have another additional badge that says I am a vendor that's been approved to work on this island. I know with South Palm, it's the same way. So really make sure that if you're on a barrier island or there's a bridge that you need to get over to be able to get to where you are, that you check with your local municipality for your vendors and for yourself as a manager, as well as the residents to be able to return to that island. That's a good point, Raphael. Thank you. When we're returning to the property, documentation, if you do suffer a loss, is going to be critical. Remember, you are the first person, or your manager is the first person returning to the island. I may be shortly after because you have a flood situation, but getting that first responders video, if you have a flood going on in your building, them responding to when they first walk into the property back will go worlds farther with your insurance carrier once you have to file the claim and go down that process. So make sure whoever the first responder is taking photos, videos of the exterior of the property first, and then the interior of the property. Even if the damage seems small or minute, or you're not sure if it's from this storm or something else in any regard, photo document everything that you're doing, video and picture. We need to make sure that all of that pertinent information that stays on property for your property version of it is in a waterproof container. So when we return to the property, it's not wet. And remember, practice makes perfect. You need to make sure that you know exactly how long it's going to take to button up your property and how long it's going to take to unbutton your property. So if it's going to take your property 7 days to be able to do its entire thing, maybe you have 200 units, pool furniture, plants outside, signage all over the place. We need to know 7 days out what we have to do first and then slowly work our way back. So you need to practice that, and practice makes perfect. I know your employees are going to be like, well, this is stupid. We kind of have an idea, but when a storm all of a sudden picks up strength and now it's going from 7 days out to 3 days out, you can get yourself into some hot water. So it's important that you know how long that takes. And Raphael, do you recommend anything for that preparedness process?
The preparedness process, just really go through it, actually walk through it. It's not just, okay, let me look at my list and get your team together. Number one, it's an opportunity to build that sense of teamwork with your team and camaraderie. And everyone understands the responsibility they have. And number two, it shows your employees as well areas of the building that they may have not even seen or have known. So for instance, if the janitorial or front desk team may have not known how to shut the water off, which they should, but maybe they didn't. And that's a good learning lesson for them. So if you have any other kind of damages, maybe it's not a hurricane, you've taken that opportunity to educate them on something else. And I've also noticed that when you go to these kinds of processes, the team also has gains a little bit more pride for the property that they're working, because they understand the complexity, and also more importantly, they understand the responsibility that they have to the residents.
Absolutely. I want to challenge my board members on this call. I want you all to think, because generally speaking, you're living on your property right now, and if there was a flood in the next 5 minutes, you were the first responder, do you know how to shut off the water?
Yeah.
Take that opportunity to go to your board or your property manager, be like, hey, I want to learn this. I need to know where this is. Because if you can stop the water and you're there in 5 minutes, and your property manager or your security can't get there for 15, do you know how much money you just saved your association by saving 15 minutes of water? I'll tell you from personal experience, you can save thousands and thousands of dollars. Yeah. So it's important that everybody that's a key component, whether it be vice president, former president, whatever your role is at your property, if you're living on property, you can save the money. All right, let's jump to the next one. So I know that we talked a little bit about the deductible before, but I really, really, really want Raphael to kind of speak to this, because he's got a lot of experience when it comes to dealing with how can we better financially prepare our properties for this. So this is the example that I want to give you. So if your property is worth $3 million, and that's your total asset, and you have a 5% deductible, you're looking at $150 $1,000. How are you getting there? And what can you do today to better prepare for that number?
Yeah, so good question, Aaron. So, and $3 million, you're being nice, because most associations are going to be much more than that. So, we traditionally like to present some form of a deductible coverage within the budgets. It gets pushed down a lot because, as you stated earlier, board members don't want to pay for it. So there are some savvy board members that have understood the value of it, and they have their deductible already set aside in a reserve in case of an emergency. For those associations that don't, for whatever reason, you decided as a board that you didn't need it. As we've stated a couple of times, it's important to have some form of a line of credit or have some kind of financing ready to go. Also, as Erin stated in her communication earlier, in her slide earlier, communication is key. If you don't have it, don't hide it from your residents now. I would kind of let them know, listen, residents, this is what we currently have in reserves. If you have any, some associations don't. If we did have a storm, this is what our estimated deductible would be. It would be about 150, just using this same example. And how would you collect that 150? You would want to communicate that to them earlier on so they know how they're able to do it. An important thing to also keep in mind is, is to have a part of your partnership, in my opinion, is to have a public adjuster already kind of lined up. Certain public adjusters, just like other service industries, they're not all bad. I'll give you an example that we had in one particular association where it flooded about 15 units, impacted the association pretty bad. Board didn't want to do a public adjuster just because they didn't want to. We told them, listen, this is not our area of expertise. We should bring in an expert. Fortunately, they decided to do so. And little did we know that water ran down to the fire panel, would have caused some major damages to the association down the line, but the public adjuster was able to identify it through his inspection. So it's important that if that's an option for you, if you're considering that you already have those agreements already signed, your rates negotiated early on, because once a storm does hit, those rates are regulated, but they are going to go up. You don't have an ability to negotiate. So if you don't have the money, just start getting yourself wrapped around this, start speaking with your bank, your banking institutions that you're currently working with, and start communicating with your residents of how you're going to collect that money if a special assessment is going to be necessary. And lastly, I'm going long on purpose on this because it's an important issue, is for those residents that, this may be an opportunity to let your residents know if you have an HO6 policy, your HO6 policy may kick in. So you may get more residents that decide to sign up for their HO6 policy. Obviously, there's timeframes when you can and can't sign up if there's a named storm. But either way, these are things you're going to want to communicate to your residents and your boards alike, letting them know that if it does get hit, this is what you're going to get hit with the special assessment. How can you avoid that special assessment? Well, you should consider getting an HO6 policy if that would occur.
That's a really great point. I would like to kind of just touch a little bit further on that one more time. The HO6 policy that your residents purchase for their own property works in tandem with the association's property to get everybody put back together according to each of those policies to a pre-loss condition. So if we're talking condo, we're talking co-op, maybe townhouse, depending on your documents, the association's policy is going to kick in, dry out the drywall, get everything to paint ready, possibly repair and replacement on that drywall, and then everything on top of that. So that includes, and this is per statute 718.111, the insurance policy of the association is not responsible for paint, baseboards, flooring. So we're talking any flooring, laminate, carpet, tile, wood floor. They are not responsible for ceiling covering. So popcorn ceiling is included in that. They are not responsible for paints, wallpapers, and then physical contents inside the unit, which includes bathroom vanities. That includes built-in cabinetry, built-in closets, any personal belongings, couches, draperies. The association is not responsible for removal, replacement, cleaning, anything that has to do with those things. So it's important that we stress to the residents at this time of the year that if we do suffer a loss, the association will only cover what the association is responsible for. All the other things that I just mentioned, that is a part of the unit owner stuff. They are responsible for those things. That is not condo, that is not association. So it's really important that we stress that if they do not have these condo HO6 policies, we pretty much are calling that self-insured. Self-insured is when you pay for any expense that happens inside your unit minus what the association is responsible for. So that comes out of unit owner pocket. Now,
And if I can add to that, for the managers and boards alike, one of the challenges when you're dealing with when you're drying out the unit is that, oh, who's going to put my baseboard back? And who's going to deal with this? And it's a conversation that, you know, really should not be had, but it's, you know, some residents just don't understand the responsibility. So like Aaron said, now is the time to communicate that. Same thing goes with floors. They believe that, well, the water came from the association or from the hurricane, you should cover my floors. You're drying everything up. If you have those laminate floors, or if you have marble floors that start to peel up because water got in between, you know, I forgot the name of it, but the term, but between the towel and your floor base, that's not going to be the association's responsibility. So as an association, if you're not communicating, you're going to have to at least educate that resident at that time. And it's much harder to educate them at that time than doing it now. And at least letting them know, listen, we understand your concern. However, we did communicate this 2 to 3 times prior to this occurring.
And I think that what has been successful for myself and the communities that I have emergency response programs with is getting in front of it. And at the beginning of hurricane season, I do a town hall meeting for the properties I have under contract. And I say, this is what the association is responsible for. This is what the unit owner is responsible for. And we do it all via Zoom now, maybe 30 minutes on a Zoom call and just saying, hey, this is our plan as the association. Does anybody have any questions? Let's talk about it. Let's open up the conversation, because the more that we talk about it now and people get a better understanding, the more successful we're going to be when the situation does occur. So that communication in that town hall meeting, it can make you look like a rock star as a management team and a rock star as a board. So those tools and the educations, we can give them the tools to be successful. Can't always make them drink it, but
yep.
We want to
lead a horse to water, we can't force them to drink it.
And we just want to make sure that the information is out there. That way we can reference this. And remember, there's Florida state statute to help back you up in all of these things. So we just need to make sure we set clear and transparent expectations going into the hurricane season.
So I do want to answer one question, because it has to do with what we were talking about. So there's an anonymous person asking a question if the association is responsible for doors, sliders, and windows. I hate to give you an attorney response, but that really depends. You have to read your documents. Some association documents do cover the windows and doors. Some of them don't. So you have to read your documents, go over it, and it'll identify what the parameters are for the association.
I do want to add on to this. I have one association in West Palm Beach, and this is the only association that I have that is responsible for the maintenance of the windows and doors. I have a couple other associations as well, like Raphael just said, that they are responsible if they are original to the building, with the caveat that they've been maintained properly. So it really is per your documents at the condo level on very, very specific who the responsibility is. Now, I also want to throw this out there because I know you guys are mostly unit owners on this call right now. If you have original windows and doors at your property right now, and your property is over 20, 25 years old, and your windows and doors start leaking and you cause damage to somebody else underneath you, you could be held liable for that damage, because that is considered neglect, whether you meant to do it or you didn't mean to do it. Everything has a shelf life. Even like you think about the silliest things, like a toilet needs to be replaced every so often. Like everything eventually will fail without proper maintenance, and it will fail due to just age in general. So it's important to keep all those things in mind. But yes, if you want us to look at those documents, I suggest going to your attorney first, or going to your association manager and asking, because it's really important that you understand your level of liability and your level of risk going into storm season as a unit owner. All right, exterior preparedness. When we're talking about preparedness, there's 2 things to always focus on: securing anything that's bolted to the ground, cemented to the ground, and then storing everything else that's not. This is my biggest pet peeve during a storm season, so I bring it up to you first. Clearing out gutters, drains, and downspouts on your building. You should be doing this once a month. At the beginning of hurricane season, we go clear off all the debris on our roofs. Make sure that if you have a flat roof, because it's not your guys that are leaving trash up there, it's the vendors that are servicing your unit owners' AC units on the roof that are going to leave debris up there. All of that becomes a projectile during a storm and needs to come off of that roof. The downspouts, I get a call every single time from a condo building that had maybe trash in their downspout. Maybe they had birds that built a nest in their downspout and had water back up into the roof of their building and flood out an entire stack. This is something super preventable. Please add it to your maintenance checklist for once a month cleaning. Remove antennas and loose objects from your roof. I usually see some sort of, I don't know, ladders or just maintenance equipment. Everything's got to come off. I always tell this story too. If you have vent stacks on your roof, and most of my condo buildings that have flat roofs on this call are going to have those, and they have a cage over the top of them, that cage needs to be secured. I have a building in Boca that is not on this call, and I will tell you about them. They had 2 cages that were plastic that were zip tied together, and then they decided to tie a 10-pound weight to them with another zip tie for Hurricane Irma. It's still on their roof today. That all needs to come off and be removed and replaced. That is general maintenance that needs to be fixed. If that weight came off during a storm and hit somebody, we're talking massive liability and massive lawsuit. So it's important that you keep your roofs clean. We also need to make sure to secure all loose objects such as trash cans, dumpsters that can be with doors that can be opened. And I always see dumpsters going down the road in South Beach during a storm. It is, close your doors, make sure they're secured. Remove all your outdoor signage, bring that inside. Anything that the association physically owns outdoors, so that could be your pool furniture. Maybe you have a pretty bar with grilling tools, all that needs to come in. We also need to make sure we schedule our tree trimmings accordingly. Y'all should have started those already this year. If you have not, we need to make sure we get those done ASAP. I always suggest the second week of May into the second week of June for getting our tree trimmings done. We don't want trees close to our buildings because they can come and hurt our buildings. We need to make sure we board up and secure exposed windows and glass walls that are not hurricane proof. This is important that you have these board up supplies, whether that be shutters that you physically have to put up. There's also some weather walls that are a great new product out on the market. And we need to ensure that all sump pumps are in good working order, that they've been tested and that they've been properly maintained. This past storm season, we had ETA. I don't know if anybody remembers this. I had a building in South Palm Beach County that had $10,000 brand new sump pumps put into their garage. They were never tested and they were also never turned on. ETA came through, flooded out their garage. They lost 24 vehicles, and we're not talking Honda Civics. Crazy. So make sure that if you have sump pumps, they work. Can't make this stuff up. Let's go to interior preparedness. Again, we're focusing on 2 things, securing and storing. Anything that is close to your windows, we want to make sure we move away from them. If we have skylights, move all furniture away from the skylights. Anything that is electronic, like your computers, TVs, we want to make sure they're unplugged, and if they're on the floor, that they're raised up off the floor. At a very bare minimum, I want to see anything electrical, whether it's TVs, again, computers, I want to see them covered with trash bags, preferably 6 mil polyplastic is the way to go to secure all of those things. Anything that is in a file box, papers, storage, anything that could potentially be ruined by water. I want to see all of that go into waterproof plastic containers. I want to make sure that all electricity is turned off except for refrigerators at the power box, and all doors are locked by the manager as the last person off the property. It's important to understand that we need to turn the electricity off at the power box and lock all those doors at the power box. There's still active electricity flowing through them if it is not done at the box, at the breaker. Anything else you want to add, Raphael?
Just simple things, at least from an association, right? The golf carts, items that belong to the association, it's important that you're keeping them in. A lot of times we've seen some easy things such as hoses that are left by the pool area, and those hoses can actually cause a lot of damage while they may not seem like they can. And if they're connected, they become a very strong whip and they can break windows. So, just look around. And as Aaron stated, it's important to really take a look at your roofs as well. If maintenance hasn't locked the roofs as they should, you'd be surprised at what you'll find up there. You'll find bicycles, we've seen a ton of things and we get surprised. Or sometimes you're a lower garden style building where you have oak trees all around and your scuppers are just full and no one has gone by there. And depending on the kind of structure that you have a wood structure where there's still roofs that are wood structures, it can collapse if there's too much weight up there with the water. So it's important that you're taking a look at those things and you're securing those areas as well. And, the doors, it sounds dumb, but Roof doors especially are notorious to be left open. It's important because you're rushing around. It's important that you're locking that, and that's part of your checklist. Because last thing you want is the roof door banging around, and all of a sudden that's an area for the wind to penetrate.
Absolutely. This is what it looks like if your doors are not secured.
Oh,
And
that was good timing.
This is actually one of my properties down in Key Biscayne on the left-hand side here. One of their residents actually did not close the door to this office building. It did not secure it closed, and it just swayed open the entire time. It destroyed the entire, this is a commercial space, the entire property though. And then this is actually a Walmart that we did after Hurricane Irma. Unfortunately, they had some vandalism that occurred just before the storm hit, and the entire store was destroyed. It created a wind vortex inside the building, and it actually snapped the main water line in the ceiling, creating a secondary damage of a flood. So it's a really sad situation because we have to sit and wait once the storm gets here. Okay. So after the storm passes, the hours are critical in getting back to the property. We need to make sure that we have a few things in place prior to going back to the physical site itself. First and foremost, team safety is key. I want everybody safe when they're going back to the property. This is not a time for us to be returning to the property in our suits. I am in full ready to go. I have my work boots on. I have waterproof clothing. I have my safety gear. Your initial response team needs to know what they should be wearing. And if you need help with that list, I can give you some examples. You need to make sure that your team understands that it is a group effort to get this whole property back up and going. Quick action is always needed. If there is some sort of flood, if there's some sort of issue, if a resident causes damage to the building, it's important that the association steps in and takes quick action to mitigate the damage. So when our initial response is not to find out who is responsible or take responsibility for a loss that potentially occurs on your property, it's how do we stop this problem from getting worse and putting our association at risk? Because we'll find out who is responsible. Our attorneys will help us. Our restoration company will help us. Our documents will help us. Our property manager will help us. Our insurance company will help us with all that stuff. But you are required per your association insurance policy to mitigate in a timely fashion. So it's important that you mitigate, and each policy is a little bit different, but that timely fashion verbiage that's in your policy needs to be upheld. If you do not mitigate in a timely fashion, you run the risk of being denied on your insurance claim. So remember, we will figure out who's responsible for causing this damage if it's a unit owner, but your association needs to take quick action. So planning, strategizing, and execution of that initial response back to your property is going to be key in getting you back up and going. So these are my very, very brief on what you should do when you return back to the property. First and foremost, keep away from all dangling power lines and report them to FPL immediately. And this is important for you condo buildings. If your building does not have power in a post-storm situation, you're gonna get 50 million calls. You're gonna get calls to the property manager, the chief engineer. Make sure that you tell the residents prior to going into storm season, if we do not have power, call FPL. The more people that report the outage to FPL in your property, the faster you are going to get service. Remember, you are one count as an association, but if you have 500 other residents in your building that are also reporting that outage, now FPL is like, oh, we got to get them up and going. There's more of them first. So think of that as an HOA as well. If you guys are all out of power, get everybody reporting that to FPL. You're going to get back up and running quicker. I don't think a lot of people realize that. Don't call the association, call FPL. Walk carefully around the exterior of the building before you return to your property. If you smell gas and you have a generator, it's important that you do not enter that property until you have deemed that not a gas leak. And you need to make sure you communicate with your service provider for your generator if you do smell that gas. I can't stress that enough because it can cause major issues. Stay out of the building. We talked about that. If you do have floodwaters around your building, it's important that you understand the risk that floodwater imposes. Floodwater from the intercoastal and from the ocean is category 3 water. That is grossly contaminated water. And anything that water touches on the interior of your building most likely is going to need to be removed and replaced. And your insurance company wants that. Trust me, it limits liability across the board. What's in ocean water? We pump out treated sewage miles out into the ocean. There could be animals in that water. We're talking intercoastal water. There's boat oil in that water. We just don't know. So it poses a risk of a health and safety hazard for not only our team that's returning to the property, but for the residents if it's not taken care of correctly. When you are entering your properties, it's important that after you do an exterior survey of your property and you mark any damages that you see, remember photo, video, you do the same on the interior. You document everything you possibly think withstood damage from the storm. We also want to make sure that on your hurricane crash cart that you have battery powered flashlights and you are not using candles. Really, really important that you turn on the flashlight before entering the property, before if you have power, especially if you have a generator on the interior of your property. Also going to generators, your residents should not be using generators on their porch balconies inside their units. That is a life safety hazard. It is illegal in the state of Florida to do so. You cannot have a generator on your balcony if you were in a condo building. That's a big no-no. We also do not have gas grills on our balconies. We are not cooking on our balconies. That is not a thing. That is life safety and presents a huge risk to the association. We need to make sure that our team that's returning to our property, as well as our residents, if we do have board members that are acting as volunteers, that you're wearing protective clothing. And if you are moving any sort of landscaping, palm fronds, down trees, that you just make sure you're taking care and you're shuffling through any debris with like a stick or something that's not your foot preferably, or your hand, because there are poisonous stakes that we do have here. Actually, there's one building I have in Miami that floods quite frequently in their parking structure that Raphael knows about. And every time I go and I clean out this parking structure, there are water moccasins and fish in the parking garage. So it's important that you don't expose your team or your residents to that risk. If you have standing water in your parking structure, please do not allow your residents in there. It is liability and risk on the association should they get hurt. And okay, we already talked about the generator. Anything you want to add to that, Raphael?
Yeah, so it's also important for us to take care of the number one asset, which is the team that's at the property. So it's important that you have the proper water, the proper food, snacks, whatever it may be, so that you can make sure your team is doing whatever job they need to do for the property. A lot of times, you know, we're focused on the equipment, the everything else that goes on, but we have to keep in mind of the number one asset, which is your team that's at the property. So make sure you have the proper supplies for them, food, flashlights, safety gear, as Aaron mentioned, and more than anything is also water. And we would want to calculate the volunteers within that food purchase as well, because obviously they're assisting. So we want to make sure that if they're assisting the association, that we can provide them with something to eat and in appreciation for the efforts that they're doing.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Thank you. So I want to challenge you guys to think about your specific properties needs right now. So the first thing that we face when we're talking about returning to our properties post-storm is inaccessibility. Do you have a property like in this top picture here that has massive trees at the base or at your guardhouse that would allow us no entry? So when is my landscaper coming and how quickly can I get these trees up to assess the damages at my property would be my first thought in this specific situation. If my landscaper can't get here within 1, 2, 3 hours of returning to this property, I might need chainsaws on this property to be able to remove these trees with my team. If I have chainsaws on the property, please make sure that they are gas powered. And also we need to make sure that we also have gas for them. I know these things sound silly, but
it's obvious, but it's just true.
you can totally get a chainsaw post-storm, but it's going to be electrical, which doesn't do you any good in this situation. So these are the things, the out-of-box ideas that we need to think about. The next thing we need to think about, the dangers. We just ran through a couple of those things, but down power line, debris on the road. We need to make sure we have a backup plan if our manager can't get to the property. And if you have a management company, a lot of my management companies I work with have a buddy system, or their regional will show up and support them if they don't have, the manager can't get there. But now let's think, what if you're a self-managed property on this call? Or what if your board is managing your property on this call? What if your board can't get back? What if your one sole manager can't get to the property because they're stuck at their house? What's your backup plan for that? We talk a lot about security and a lot about safety. It's really important that you guys understand that if you do suffer some sort of broken glass or maybe the front doors blew off your property, that you have a plan to secure your property once you assess the damage. Maybe you need board up supplies. Maybe you have a restoration contract that your supplier has the board up equipment for you. Those are things we need to think about. If we do not have hurricane impact windows, what's our plan should we have an issue? Some things you might need in your execution of your recovery plan. The first thing is your contracts, your pre-storm contracts for service after the storm passes. The most common thing that I see is mold remediation and decontamination services post-storm. And that could be wind-driven rain. That could be one of your unit owners not closing their sliding glass doors, windows, and balcony. And I know I see that question up there, which is why I'm bringing this up. If, like I said, if somebody doesn't do the right thing and maybe they pulled in all their stuff and left their sliding glass doors open this much, which is going to lead me into this question, who's responsible for those damages? Again, association needs to make sure that they maintain control of the situation. Because once you say, unit owner, you caused the damage to this building, you're responsible for getting it fixed, you're giving up control of your asset as an organization and you're putting it in the hands of a unit owner. Please tell me if you think that it's okay that a unit owner who screws up and makes a mistake and doesn't close their sliding glass doors, causes damage to your building, is going to have the knowledge to go after the vendor that's going to be right for fixing your building. Probably not the person that should be making the decision on who fixes that common element property, right? It's important that the association takes control of that situation, and then we'll figure out liability costs associated with that and getting that reimbursement from the party that caused the damage later. It's important that you understand that as a business, you need to look out for the overall health of your property, not just for the interests of one individual. And I think that Raphael can speak to that a lot and the things that you've seen with making sure that the building is properly taken care of post-storm.
Sure, you do find that instance, unfortunately, more than what we should, is where we know where the responsibility comes from. And the board wants to push that responsibility onto the other individual. And you know, once we take a minute to explain to the board, similar to what you said, Aaron, that listen, we need to manage this business. We can't allow that resident or those vendors to start going through that process. We need to manage this process, mitigate the damage, remediate everything we have to, and then, you know, put the liability at that time, let the attorneys deal with it at that time, or the insurance company at that time. But the importance is to make sure that we get the business unit or the residents up to speed on what's going on and get everything mitigated as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. And time is of the essence in those things. What are we trying to avoid in any water situation? Mold. And mold grows within 72 hours in the state of Florida, in the Tri-County where we live here. It's important that we're trying to avoid that at all costs. And I can tell you right now, mitigation is always cheaper than remediation. Remediation means removal. Mitigation, the physical dry out of the property. So if we can manage the mitigation portion, we'll never have to get into the remediation portion and the reconstruction phases. So some other things that you might need after a storm, and if you can invest in some of these things as a property, I always suggest doing so. You'll need air movers, dehumidifiers, maybe some sort of floor mat or inner wall drying system, and your restoration contractor should have all of these things, including generators and emergency lighting. It's really, really crucial that you assess what is your biggest risk exposure for your property. And as a part of your restoration partner's contract with you, they should be doing site surveys. They should be partnering with you to assess these things. So if you need more information on that, you can email me after the call, because I'll email you all anyway, and we can talk about your specific property's needs. But these are also things that your property manager and your management company should be bringing to the table and saying, our roof is 25 years old. We've done some maintenance. Maybe we haven't done some maintenance, and this is our biggest risk. What's the plan hurricane season come around? That's what your property management company should be challenging you with now, to make the good decisions today to get better results tomorrow. So how do you overcome a lack of power in your building? You need to make sure that you have a post-storm contract for that. What if you do get hit and we do have wind-driven rain that enters your property? If you don't have power, how is your restoration contractor going to dry it out? They would then need that power. So I think what I want to challenge each one of you today on this call to think about is go through your contracts. Who do you have in writing today that will be servicing you post-storm? And are they the right contractor for your property? Do they have any referrals that they can give you of other buildings they work at in the area, or other properties like yours that they currently service? Can you call another property manager that they work with and get a recommendation from them? Those are the things that you want to ask the vendors, and get those things now to make sure that they service your property correctly. Because I can tell you right now, how I service a high-rise condo building is completely different than a single-family home, which is completely different than a townhouse, which is completely different than a co-op. And working with a vendor that understands your specific property needs, and I stress this in the co-op, townhome, and condo world, is so, so crucial. I save you guys so much money by making you not do all the things that you think you should do, like putting the baseboards back on, repainting an entire unit that you're not responsible for. So make sure you partner with the right people that are specific to your property, that know your property's needs. Raphael, you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you covered most of the major points.
I think we ran through the mold thing. I mean, we talked about a lot of this, but I really want to emphasize the point to you guys that if you don't have post-storm contracts today with your vendors, that's the first word of advice that I would give you to come out of this situation. Make sure you're doing your due diligence with that. It's really, really important that if you don't have it in writing, you get at least a verbal commitment and you have their account manager's phone information. It will give you so much peace of mind, your residents' peace of mind. And if you don't have these things in place already, work with a vendor like myself or Raphael. We can help give you the right direction to move in.
Excellent point. Well, Erin, thank you so much. I think you did an amazing job providing the information and a ton of resources for both our managers and board members that are on today's webinar. We will have this video up on our YouTube page. So Ashley will share that with you. It'll probably be up within the next 24 to 48 hours. So if you want to share it with any fellow board member or any manager or committee member, feel free to do so. Do you have any closing remarks, Erin, that you would like to provide before we end this webinar?
Well, thank you all for joining us today. I know in the property management world, you guys have very little to no time, but I will be filing your course credits with the DVPR today. I will try to get their certificates to you by end of business today. If not, first thing tomorrow morning, you'll all get an email from me. And if any of your properties or any of your property managers want to talk about your specific needs, please feel free to email me or call me, and we can sit down and figure out a plan for you for hurricane season.
Well, thank you so much, Erin. Again, my name is Raphael Aquino. It's been a pleasure having you all on today's webinar. We look forward to see you at our next webinar. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.